not heal all wounds, so much as it blurs the hurts, I think. You forget things. My mother and father were not meant for each other, even though in the end, it did all work out. I am here today because the two of them were once thrown in together in Jerome, Arkansas, one of America's concentration camps for Japanese Americans during World War II. Jerome, Arkansas. My dad had this little ditty and dance he did when he had a beer or two or three. Jerome, Arkansas, where it got so hot the corn in the fields popped and the horses, damned if they didn't think it was snow and fall over and freeze to death. My mother hated that story and hated that my dad was drinking. Too bad online dating services like Tinder and eHarmony didn't exist back then. Their mismatch occurred through an act of war and my dad's doggedness, or I would not be here in this particular gene pool scramble. When I look at an old photo that I have of the two of them sitting in their 1940s finery at a fancy dance hall on Ashland Avenue in Chicago before they were married, I can see that they were really, really different from each other. They are at a white tablecloth event with their friends, folks they had also gotten thrown in together with during their camp days. My dad's wavy, Errol Flynn slick down hair and come hither stare jump out at you. You can almost inhale his cigarette smoke and flirt with those eyes that never missed a thing, especially a pretty face. But in this picture, my mother is looking off to the side, as if trying to find a way out of their courtship. Her conservative, form-fitting navy blue suit and updo look somehow uptight and displeased with the whole scene, as if she would really rather be home reading a book. The two were first thrown in together in one of the 10 camps that mostly held women and children and men, like my dad, who were too old or unable to serve in the U.S. Army for some reason. Able-bodied Japanese American men served in the U.S. military because they were U.S. citizens, while the government put their grandmothers, sisters, brothers, wives, kids, and 4Fs were behind barbed wire in barracks scattered in remote areas in states like Idaho, Arizona, Minnesota, and Arkansas. My mom and dad would not otherwise have crossed paths in a million years. After the 1966 Freedom of Information Act, I sent for their FBI files, just out of curiosity, because I wanted to know more about what was in them and what they were like in the good old days before the war and before they were married. That was when I first suspected that eHarmony would have definitely placed these two with other people. Theirs was a match made by happenstance. Both of their FBI files were filled with facts about their friends and what they read. Time magazine? What was wrong with that? Where they worked, what people who knew them said about them to FBI agents who collected all of this data on over 110,000 Americans back in the 40s. All of these details were carefully typed on paper forms with dates and times and the names of neighbors who knew them. My dad had given the FBI the names of 3 non-Japanese people who would vouch for him, being a loyal American and a good citizen. One of his references was the chief of police in his little hometown of Parlier, California, where his father owned a cafe that did have a backroom card parlor where gambling and who knows else what took place. The chief said to the FBI, according to the file, "You ought to lock up this Jap behind bars and throw away the damn key." My mother's file said that her main interests were ballet, the symphony, tennis, and her books. After they were released from the Arkansas camp, they were not allowed to return home to California. They had to move to the Midwest. My mother was released temporarily at first to look for a job in Chicago, but could not find one according to the back and forth correspondence with the camp director. She was a college graduate, and I suppose no one wanted a thinker on the assembly line. She eventually, rather than going back to the camp, I guess, just broke down and married my dad at City Hall in Chicago. I knew I would not starve if I married your father, said my mom to me once. She was actually happy when she saw her FBI file and was glad that they had saved all of this information on her that she had forgotten. Where she worked, the names of her friends, neighbors, college students, her hobbies and pastimes. The FBI had it all and stored it for her like a secure backup memory stick. If my mom could have maybe time traveled and snatched someone like Edward Snowden from the future and given him a look at what was going on back then, maybe he might have blown the whistle on the whole concentration camp thing. But then I guess I would not be here to tell you the story. Without the war and the concentration camps, my mom certainly would never have married a fun-loving, high-spirited guy like my dad, who only lived to age 50. My dad was probably drawn to my mom's calm manner and reserve and just went crazy nuts for her. Their romance was the talk of the camp, I hear. Hell, they had nothing else to do in the swamps of Arkansas but stomp snakes and gossip. She had nowhere to run, and like a trapped gazelle, she let the lion catch her. By the time I was born, my dad was a journeyman tool and die maker at Stuart Warner, where his main preoccupation was to cause trouble for his bosses as the shop steward for his beloved machinist union. I have a picture of him, smiling and waving on the picket line with his union brothers and bowling partners. He was happiest around trouble and commotion and the excitement of being out on strike with his buddies. My mother wound up teaching 4th grade at Youngman Elementary School on 18th Street in Pilsen. Both of my parents figured that I would always be the only one in any social group, the oddball, and they wanted me to fit in and be comfortable in my own skin wherever I was. So I pretty much always was and am. When I was 6, I just thought I was Italian, like all the other kids. Shirakawa, my last name, sounded like theirs. Adolfino, Caparoni, Venegoni, Shirakawa. I was even Goldilocks in our 4th grade play, which was in Italian. I was okay with being on stage reciting, "Mi chiamo Goldilocks." But now that I'm salt and pepper locks, mostly salt, I can recall all of these things, but have to think a while to remember what I did last weekend. Amazon has just offered to store files for me on my HDX Kindle Fire Cloud for a fee. Now I have my own files online. I never have to remember a thing either. Amazon keeps my memories for me, so I just have to click on them and tell them to you.